Hi, everyone. Welcome to a beautiful day. My name, of course, is Dr. Julie Tuman. I wanted to pop in and have a little conversation about how emotions relate to the healing process. I think as time goes on, I think more and more people are aware that emotions do play a role in the healing process. And I know a lot of people are trying to focus on their emotional health as well as their physical health. I think one of the places that there's a bit of discord is that we're not paying attention to how the emotions are actually directly linked to organ function and how that all plays together. A lot of times, we look at emotional health as something that's kind of partnered with but still kind of separate from our physical health. It's almost like that goes in that box over there, and then the emotional health expert helps me deal with that problem. And the problem is that most people who are quote unquote specialists in emotional health don't have any biological specialty at all. And so they don't have an understanding of how the emotional experiences relate directly to hormonal and organ function, cellular function. And so as a result, I think we end up missing huge opportunities for healing. And on the same token, a lot of times we go see someone because, let's say, we are tired and we wonder, is part of this a thyroid problem? Is it an adrenal problem? Hey, I've also got pain in my joints and I'm not sleeping. And, their specialty is the quote unquote box of biology, right? So they're looking at it through that lens. And this is something that happens a lot. We're taught in any profession to kind of look through the lens of the profession that we're in. And many times we get very, caught up in the excitement and, the science of one particular avenue of that. And then it becomes the lens through which we view everything. But if we look at the body through the Chinese medicine model, what we can see is that the emotions that so many of us are feeling as we go through our everyday are directly linked to the organ systems themselves. So in Chinese medicine, the lungs, when they're in a state of balance, are associated with the emotion of courage. But when they're out of balance, or the emotion that can strongly affect them, is grief. Now, this can show up a number of ways. I can tell you I've seen numerous chronic lung conditions that have a direct link between the physiological manifestation and stuck emotion in the organ system itself. And, and again, a lot of these people had spent years and years and years in quote unquote therapy and had done a lot of body work and had done a lot of things to try to work on those lungs. But unfortunately, because it had all been separate from the actual syndrome itself, they weren't resolving. Now, if we look to the next organ systems, the heart, it is associated with somewhat with a sense of joy, definitely a sense of sort of like spirit and connection. And when we're out of balance, one of the big symptoms in the heart is actually, we can see a lot of anxiety. Now that one will be tended to be focused also in conjunction with elements of the liver and the pericardium, because the organ systems are viewed different in that Chinese medicine model. But this is key because a lot of people consider, anxiety to be a brain condition. And the problem there is that it's so much more complex than that. And sadly, this is why a lot of people suffer with anxiety for long spans of time, because it's dealt with as either a thought processing issue. So it's sort of taken on as an intellectual exploration of what thoughts are creating the patterns, or it's taken as, a need for biochemical shifting, unfortunately, of which a lot of what's out there in medicine is either going to be trying to manipulate serotonin levels, which actually elevated serotonin is associated with more anxiety, or with trying to manipulate other brain neurochemistry. And it can play a role. Mind you, a lot of that neurochemistry is actually rooted in the gut. But the problem is that it's a connected issue of a number of organ systems. And so unfortunately, if you're just trying to quiet the one response, but you're not realizing that part of it comes from the liver, part of it's coming from the heart, part of it's coming from the pericardium, there's aspects that are biochemical in relationship to hormonal function, but then there's aspects of spent emotion and the gland or organs themselves being diminished, then you end up in kind of a quandary, because this is why a lot of people suffer with anxiety and end up, basically being able to do abortive therapies at best and not being able to move much further past that. If we look at the liver is associated with anger when we're out of balance, anger, frustration. When we're in balance, it is very much so kindness, this sort of like gentleness and ease of flow, this ability to regard the situation in front of you or the person in front of you from that state of sameness, of like, hey, we're both from the same. And liver problems are rampant in the West, both physiologically and mentally, emotionally. And yet, when was the last time that anyone ever thought that your experience of constant frustration and overwhelm had a liver component, right? Because it's not part of the paradigm. Furthermore, when was the last time that people with elevated liver enzymes or fatty liver, was there any exploration done to work on freeing the liver from the stuckness and patterns that generate those particular conditions and the associated emotions with them? This is the challenge, right? So somewhat you can do some of that with Chinese medicine, with acupuncture, although I will say that it does take more than that. This is one of my vexations in how some acupuncture is applied, is that it's not about the totality of the person. It's like very systematic, and like we always use these points for these conditions. So we have to partner when it comes to the liver, especially. It is the wood element. We must be partnering food to nourish and balancing that food with the other organ systems. The liver is associated with the sour flavor. In the West, we actually consume a lot of those sour foods, especially if you're doing keto. You may not think you do, but a lot of the meats are actually sour in flavor in the Chinese medicine model, which I have seen in a lot of people with keto, and this was true for me in the past too, so I'm looping myself in here, is that the more into keto I got, the more prone I was to bouts of frustration, bouts of wanting to be kind of like quick to respond to things, very reactionary. That's all liver. And if you look at the pattern, it's a lot of imbalance in the foods when people eat keto, because there's very little of the actual sweet flavor and a lot of salty and a lot of sour. And so unfortunately, it really creates a disruption in the organ systems. That is one more stack in the evidence. We could, obviously, you can go find my videos on keto, but it is a very unbalanced way to eat in terms of that balance in the organ systems. And then we see a lot more rapidity, frustration, prone to being reactionary, a lot of that head spinning space. That's all associated there with the liver too. Now, if we look at the spleen, stomach, those organ systems are the earth element. And when we're balanced, it's this state of compassion and kind of stillness, this nourished place that also kind of like that mother aspect. Now, when we look at the unbalanced state, it's worry, overthinking. So unfortunately in the West, we have huge problems with worry and overthinking because it's kind of all we do. I mean, if you look at the amount of media that we consume, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TV news, online news, blog posts, we are consistently consuming information. And that puts our brain into a state of overthinking, and actually really is a challenge, because whether you realize it or not, that is a constant state of going. And to your nervous system, that means that there's constantly something to respond to. Well, that state of constant response evokes a whole lot of stress in the system that actually taxes all the organ systems, because as soon as the spleen is taxed because we're overthinking and we're worried, then when we take in food, we actually can't process that food. We can't get the nutrients out of the food. So we end up malnourished as a consequence of it. Now, the longer this goes on, this is actually the etiology of part of what happens in leaky gut, part of what happens in what people think is candida, part of what happens in SIBO, part of what happens in all of the digestive issues, because there is a state of chronic overthinking, taxing the spleen network, which does not let us recover. Now, there's a big correlation between the spleen and the hormonal systems, and so there's this correlative aspect there that you can see showing up as thyroid and as adrenal, as pituitary issues, which is again why you can't just, let's say, treat thyroid, because a lot of times what happens is you just don't get much return, because in the process there were no efforts made to regenerate the spleen, there were no efforts made to harmonize the emotional state, there were no efforts made to clear that emotional toxicity from our tissues. We talk a lot about being worried about metal toxicity and pesticide toxicity, but what people don't realize is that emotions get stored like physical toxins in your tissues, which means that at the end of the day, if there isn't a cohesive way to allow that melting and release, and you don't have the techniques and tools to be able to do that, what happens is that for many people, those things stand as a big blockade in their healing. And they'll say, oh, but I'm eating so clean. Oh, but I'm doing this. Oh, but I've took the supplements. Oh, but I've been taking herbs. And the problem is that those are only biochemical. They are not whole in their spectrum. There's no work being done to free up that emotional toxicity in the extracellular matrix. There's no work being done to free up the way emotions have created rigidity in the cell and in the mitochondria. Even down at the level of the DNA, there's no work being done. And so unfortunately, that's where a lot of people then say, oh, but I have a therapist. Well, the therapist is doing a lot of cognitive work, which is, again, taxing the spleen because you're talking. And there is no integration into the organ systems, into the body. And as a result, there's much more tendency for this to become indelibly entrenched. And then we don't understand it. It's so confusing for the person experiencing it because you think, but I'm doing so many things and I get it. And unfortunately, there are not many people paying attention to the body as a whole structure in the healing process. Again, because we get so excited about our little box that we got, excited about because we learned a new thing. So that's how that kind of happens. And then, we can see the corollaries. Now, like, for example, small intestine is linked to the heart in Chinese medicine. So it's a paired organ network. So when you start to think about people saying, well, your second brain is in your gut, and really I would say, where do we really process things from, right? It's really from our heart, from that energy and that space of compassionate consciousness. We don't really want certain parts of our brain being responsible for making the decisions in our life, especially the animalistic parts of our brain. Those are lower level functions that are ruled by fear. So a lot of that consciousness, that presence that we really want to be living from, because then from that percolates joy and percolates connection and percolates relationship and percolates, expansive forces. So that's all very much so some heart-based energy in conjunction with the other systems. So we look at the small intestine, and is it any wonder why we have a massive number of people suffering from SIBO? I mean, SIBO is not just a biochemical disturbance. It's very much so an emotional disturbance hooked into the biochemistry. It involves every system. And there's a direct connection to our emotional state of the heart and how we've made the liver take over the job of kind of running the body, and how we've been pushing ourselves and overthinking. There's this massive relationship. And yet that's a great one, because if you look at how a lot of people treat SIBO, it's like, we're going to kill off the pathogen. That's what's going to heal your gut. Well, the pathogen is there because the environment was ideal for it. The pathogen is there because the organ systems can't do their jobs, because we are overthinking, because the systematic relationship between the heart and the small intestine has been altered. And that is dual, biochemical and emotional and mental, all at the same time. Which is why a lot of people go through quote unquote SIBO treatment and then go, now what? Why aren't I better? Why am I still suffering? And the same thing, the large intestine is paired with the lungs in Chinese medicine. So it is the lower pair of the lung. Now there's this huge correlation between, upper respiratory issues and colon issues. And the stasis in one will show up as stasis in another. And I know we don't talk about grief as a big emotion, I don't think, in today's society. I mean, we talk about it when we lose people, when we lose our fur friends, we talk about it in those ways, but I really feel that we have a pervasive problem of grief in this modern world, grieving for aspects of life that we didn't live, grieving for experiences we never had. And yet the funny thing is I don't think we feel them. And so even the things that we don't feel, in fact, even more so the things that we don't feel, are also huge impacts on our organ systems. And so it's no wonder that we have so much congestion in this lung network, and it shows up as so many large intestine issues, with constipation, with inflamed bowels, with, polyps, with colon cancer. These are all further extensions again of the fact that the biochemistry is not independent of the totality of us, and that it has to be regarded from that whole sphere. Because, one person might have constipation because they have absolutely almost no response to thyroid at the cell level. Another might have constipation because the liver is actually failing to do its job because it's so burdened either physiologically or emotionally or both. Other people might have constipation because they do overthink crazy amounts and they've had incredible stress in their life, and no one's ever given them any tools other than just try to reduce your stress. I hear that one all the time. And so as a result, the spleen is weak and it's not able to do its job, and neither is the stomach or the pancreas. And as a result, you're getting half digested food. And as a result of that, it's your body's burdened. Some people might have that constipation because the lungs don't have any descending action, and there's this stasis in the large intestine. There's so many reasons, and yet, we tend to loop it. And unfortunately, good gosh, the use of laxative type things has just skyrocketed, whether it's the over-the-counter kind of more conventional stuff, or, when people start guzzling magnesium and vitamin C and thinking, I'm doing something good for myself, because it's not a harsh laxative. It's not Miralax with its neurological damaging impacts. But you guys, the reality is that if we're having to use, in essence, purgatives to get the gut to move, then there's a problem. It tells you that your body's self-regulating mechanism for that organ system is failing. And now if we move on to the organ system, we can look at the kidney. Well, the kidney is, in Chinese medicine, it's the deepest layer in the body. It's associated with the bones, with the bone marrow, low back, knees, the joints. The brain tissue is said to be associated there with the bone marrow too. And the one thing in Chinese medicine that always has made such an impact on me is that once your problems reach the level of the kidney, there's an issue, a really big issue. Well, guess what? Being fatigued, not sleeping, having insomnia, having brain fog. These are all kidney level conditions. Because what happens is the lower the energy gets, our body keeps doing workarounds. It just keeps kind of like drawing from someplace else, draw from someplace else, draw from someplace else. And it gets to the point where the system with the most energy that's left to draw from, because it's sort of stored there as a treasure, is the kidney system. When we start drawing from the kidney system, we are literally consuming our longevity. We are eating away, the years that would have been our 89th year, our 88th year, our 87th year. We're eating those years in order to fuel the body, because along the way, we haven't been taught how to restore that vitality, and the imbalances that are happening in our system are going unaddressed because everybody's looking through their box. The therapist thinks you just need to talk about that childhood trauma some more. The gut guy thinks that we need to kill off some more pathogens in the gut and give you more probiotics. The digestive guy, or the guy whose specialty is blood sugar management, thinks we need to cut out all the carbohydrates so that your cells don't have to process glucose anymore. I mean, everybody's got their box, right? And in the end of the day, none of those things is really looking at how it all links together. And so as a result, we start drawing from that kidney energy, and we start literally consuming the longevity in our body. And the problem is that the symptoms associated with that are considered still so surface, right? You never hear someone have said to their doctor, "Doc, I'm exhausted." And the doctor goes, "Oh my gosh, we need to do something about that." More and more what I hear is that the doc is either condescending, says, "You're just being dramatic. You're getting older, accept it. Maybe you're depressed." For women, it's always, that's part of the hormonal changes. Just deal with it. Very rarely is anyone going, "Oh my God, this is concerning." There's this passing off of a major indication that we've moved into the deepest layer of the body. The same thing. "Hey doc, my joints ache often. Should be taken seriously." "Hey doc, my low back aches." "Hey doc, my brain is foggy." I'm not sleeping. These are all things that we need to take very seriously because they're the small indicators that progression has already been made. Now, associated with that kidney system, and this makes total sense, the organ of imbalance or the emotion of imbalance is fear. So look at the state of the world right now. Look at how there are a million things to be afraid of for most people at all times. That fear is in the background, and guess what happens? When we live in that fear, it consumes that life force voraciously. And it ends up being that we are being consumed by an emotional force. It roots itself down deep. That's why you feel that fear. You know, so often people say, well, I feel fear in my gut. It's part of the reason why is because it's associated with that deep system. Now, from a physiological standpoint, we know that every study ever done says that when we exist in a state of fear, it alters how our organs function. It immediately diminishes immune system function. Immediately. There's an immediate drop in the veracity of our body's ability to do appropriate immune response. We have seen that it immediately can actually change brain function. It can lower our cognitive abilities. It can lower our problem-solving skills. It can put us into a state of reactionary response. Guess what happens too? Fear prompts that the liver thinks that the liver gets very congested, starts no longer detoxifying, no longer processing, because it's going into that restrictive holding mode. Guess what happens? People become reactionary. They get angry. They strike out. Meanwhile, inside of us, our vitality is being consumed at an alarming rate. And we end up emptied out. And then on the flip side of it, there are no plans or parameters to refill that vitality, to restructure it, to be able to bring back that chi, to nourish all of the organ systems, to see where the weak spot was for us. Because it is going to be slightly different for each of us. Consuming that kidney chi for one person is going to have a more liver side bent. For another person, it's going to be more spleen based. For another person, there's going to be a lot of fire. For another person, there's going to be a lot of cold. It can be very varied. But the point still stands is that the more we exist in that state of fear, the more we draw down the kidney chi. The more we tax the deep levels of ourselves. And why it's so key that we recognize that these emotions in life, they're not random. And they're not to be feared. Emotions, when experienced, are able to move through and not stay stuck in the realm of that organ system. And as they move through, then we're able to be liberated from that state. And the organ system has not been burdened by that moment in time. And this is supposed to be part of healing. The moving through. The learning how to experience things, the learning how to partner the biology to the emotional state without having to sit and talk for hours about whatever has happened to us in the past. Because again, the reality is that that brings it back into the cognitive realm. Now the poor spleen is worried and we're back into the loop. This is why so many people get so stuck, because it is all connected. As you can see, you know, these organ systems, my gosh, they're all so intricately connected. The relationship is indelible, and it isn't just a physiological one. You know, your liver doesn't just detox. That's a real rudimentary view of the liver. The heart does not just pump blood. When we begin to understand our body from that place, then it becomes harder for us to say things like, well, my body will just have to keep up. I've got things to do, because we start to recognize that it is a community that we live in. It's us. We are a community. And so then we won't be so inclined to just say, it must. I've got plans, which is what I know so many of us say to ourselves is, look, it's just going to have to happen. But that's not in deference to the complexity and the beauty and the true divinity of this amazing body that we live in. And the more that we can learn to connect to that, the more that we will give homage and deference to the beauty of this structure and the complexities of honoring it in the healing process, and the more that we'll be able to see why so often we get stuck. So I wish you big blessings, you guys. I really want you to understand the complexity and the beauty of this structure you live in, and how it is truly, truly miraculously made. And the links between all of it are no accident. So I wish you a beautiful day. Be kind to yourself. Blessings.